What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. If you're currently listening to us on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, welcome in as well. Please make sure you leave us a detailed review and a 5-star rating. What's up, everybody? We are back. I am your host, Jeff Nadu, and this is episode 152 of the Sit Down. Before we get into the episode this week, I want to remind you, spring is almost here, and I'd advise there's nothing better than a cigar on the patio after a hard day's work. Make sure you go check out our signature sit-down cigar, available right now from Privada Cigar Club. The link to buy is in the description of this audio and video. Welcome back, everybody. We are here for yet another episode, another week, another sit down. And over the years here on the show, we have discussed mob farm teams, everyone from the Giannini crew to the Bath Avenue crew to other mob farm teams. What exactly is a mob farm team? Well, it's a group of young men generally related to the mafia in some way, and their goal is to do criminality to try to impress mobsters, and down the road they could become made members of the mob. Now, if you look at the current or mafia over the last 20 years, a lot of mobsters have gotten their starts in mob farm teams. We look to the current boss of alleged boss of the Bonanno crime family, a person, Michael Mancuso. He was at one point a part of the East Harlem Purple Gang, which wasn't necessarily a farm team, but it was a quasi farm team. Some of the individuals we're going to speak about today are high-ranking members of the Lucchese Crime Family. One farm team we don't talk much about, though, was a group that would operate out of this shopping center in the area of Yonkers in New York. The story of the Tanglewood Boys next on the sit down. Now, the story doesn't necessarily start with one person in the Tanglewood Boys, though it's important to understand they're one of the only mob farm teams where virtually every member of the Tanglewood Boys had a direct relation to someone in the mafia. Essentially, 95% of the crew was either the son or nephew of a mobster. Now, the Tanglewood shopping center is in the area of Northeast Yonkers. The address is 2270 Central Park Avenue in Yonkers. Here you can see it on a map. It is up above in Northeast Yonkers. And to be honest, it's not exactly the nicest of shopping centers. Essentially, this is a photo of it in recent day. However, at the time the Tanglewood Boys were moving around in that shopping center, it would essentially include 13 stores, which included a deli, pizzeria, dry cleaner, Dunkin' Donuts, and a Chinese food restaurant. Now, like I said, these individuals would hold court, and most of them were the sons of high-ranking mobsters, which we'll get into. The first person, though, that we kind of look at the etymology of the Tanglewood Boys, the person that most of these people directly reported to was this guy, a person called Anthony Blue Eyes Santarelli. Now, Santarelli is a made member in the Lucchese Crime Family, and he came up under people like Bowet Barada, Sally Bo DeSimone, Stephen Crea, all people that were from the Bronx. The Lucchese family has always had a Bronx faction. They still do today. And Santarelli was a bookmaker. He was a loan shark. He was a gambler. And he was a guy who essentially had most of these young kids under his association. Now, his son, Alfred Santarelli, would ultimately become one of the founding members of the Tanglewood Boys. Other members of the crew that we'll get into include John Santarelli, or John Petroselli, not John Santarelli, John Petroselli, Darren Mazzarella, Joseph Lubrano, Anthony DeSimone, and Stephen Crea Jr. Now, all of those people, with the exception of Mazzarella, are direct relations to mobsters. And I want to kind of discuss them. Obviously, Alfred Santarelli is the son of Anthony Santarelli. John Petrocelli is the son of one-time Lucchese associate and hitman John Petrocelli Sr. Now, we referred to John Petrocelli in a show we did here on Gus Faraci. At one point, John Petrocelli Sr. was actually whacked by members of the Lucchese Crime Family for operating and having a relation to Gus Faraci and actually hiding him at one point during that disaster in the 80s, involving Faraci, the Bonanno crime family, Lucchese crime family. So Petrocelli's father, John Sr., did a lot of prison time. So it's no surprise that not only his one son, John, but his other son, Joseph Petrocelli, who was also in the Tanglewood Boys, found their way into the streets. Now, Darren Mazzarella is going to be most of the focus of this show. Mazzarella was the one kid who did not have a father in the mafia. In fact, his father was an electrical engineer who worked a lot in Manhattan. He wasn't around much, and he operated kind of without a father figure. Now, obviously, we can venture to believe that other members, we kind of know how they got their start. Anthony DeSimone's father was Sally Bo DeSimone. He and his brother Andrew followed their dad into a life of crime. And obviously, Stephen Crea is the son of Stephen Crea Sr., who we can kind of understand. Now, Mazzarella is an interesting name because he would take a far different path than essentially every other person in this crew. Darren Mazzarella was born in July of 1970. He would live in and around Tanglewood Shopping Center, essentially right behind it. He would live in a apartment complex not far from the shopping center. Now, Mazzarella, alongside his brother Nicholas, who would also become a member of the Tanglewood Boys, live with their mother in an apartment. Now, Mazzarella would attend Roosevelt High School in and around Yonkers. Now, Mazzarella was actually quite a good baseball player, and by 1988, though, he would have to leave the sport of baseball due to an injury. Mazzarella would spend some time in community college. However, he would drop out in 1989. The thing for Mazzarella was he and all his friends wanted to be gangsters, and eventually they wanted to graduate from being a gangster to being a mobster. All of them were Italian, and they ultimately had the idea of, we want to be mobsters. That's all we know. And again, as we talk about time and time again on this show, most of the people that enter into the world of the mafia, their life is already decided for them. I mean, look really wherever you go. South Philadelphia, the Bronx, Yonkers, Brooklyn. All of the people we talk about have some connection to the mob, right? Whether it's their uncle, their father, their brother, all these people's lives are figured out for them. Now, Mazzarella would talk openly about his time in the Tanglewood crew, and he would say that really all it was about for the crew was to make money. The goal was to make money and, according to him, mess people up. Mazzarella would say at one point to a newspaper writer, quote, "We used to go to clubs all over Westchester and the Bronx and beat the shit out of people. We were just raging through the night. We intimidated old wise guys. We got free drinks, and if we started a fight, the other guys got thrown out. We dressed like clean-cut college kids, and we even used to make fun of gangsters in those stupid white-on-white shirts and silk suits. Our heroes were simple: Phil Simms, Don Mattingly, and John Gotti. How could you not like the way he dressed? We would do robberies and go shopping at Take 6 and Century 21 in Manhattan. Mostly, though, we wore Gap and Nike. We thought we looked better than them old-timers." So there was a certain level of respect that they obviously had for the mafia, but they were young. They're from a different generation. They wore the sweatsuits. They liked Gap and Nike and different things like that. And a lot of these kids realized that they had a license to do whatever they wanted in the streets because if things got too bad, they could just call their fathers. Do you know who my father is? We've heard that before. John Jr., right? I'm sure Michael Franzese dropped the "You know who my father is." Everybody knew who these people's families were. So they weren't going to fuck with them. And these guys could do what they wanted. Now, Mazzarella would say that they were involved in everything from bookmaking to loan sharking to robbery to selling narcotics. And by 1991, Darren Mazzarella would actually begin working in a large bookmaking office in and around the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, not far, and a essential half-hour ride from his area of Yonkers. And he would work in a bookmaking office that was said to be run by his quasi rabbi, Anthony Santarelli. So things were good for Mazzarella. They were making money. Everybody was doing what they had to do. However, what we would learn about Mazzarella and people like John Petrocelli is that they were very violent individuals. In 1992, Mazzarella would be at a party in and around Tuckahoe in New York. He would be there with his brother Nicholas when at one point a Gambino associate who was high on cocaine began teasing Mazzarella's brother Nicholas. Mazzarella, enraged, would choke the kid, stab him in the neck, and they would dump his body on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And just a month later, in March of 92, John and Joseph Petrocelli were at a bar in New Rochelle, New York. Joseph Petrocelli, who I don't have a photo of, began to get in an argument with a group of black teenagers from a rival neighborhood. Petrocelli would jump into his car and fire into a crowd, killing a person called Kasim Merchant, who was 16 years old. Joseph Petrocelli is doing life in prison for that murder. Now, his brother, John Petrocelli, would get back weeks later by allegedly killing a black teenager in retribution. These guys were very lethal people. They had no problem doing what they had to do. And we'll learn as we get through this show that these guys had no issue doing what they had to do. And this is the common theme between a lot of these mob farm teams. Not only is the goal to make money, but it is to very much scare people. You don't mess with us. And if you do mess with us, you are going to be dealt with violent depravity. That simple. And these guys didn't take any shit. Again, John Petrocelli was the son of a hitman. What did you expect him to become? His brother was killed in the street. This guy was off the deep end, doing what he had to do. And all these guys were very loyal to each other. Now, eventually, Darren Mazzarelli would get into his own beefs as well. In and around early 1995, he is still working for Santarelli, and the bookmaking operation they have is generating hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, it was said that during college football and NFL Sundays, these guys were bringing in, six figures every weekend. They were making a lot of money doing this. Now, obviously, the Tanglewood Boys aren't making six figures, but they're making a nice amount every month, every week. Obviously, a lot of this is being kicked up, but these guys are making good money. They're driving nice cars. And Mazzarella would talk about that. He would discuss that, they all had nice cars. They all drove Mercedes and whatever they wanted. They were going on vacations, hanging out together with women, enjoying their life. Eventually, though, Petrocelli and Mazzarella and the crew continued to deal with things. In 1995, Darren Mazzarella and a person called Freddie Boy Santarelli had a beef with two kids that were part of a rival group and that were bookmaking as well. Two men called Joseph and Adam Cosentino. Now, Cosentinos were the sons of Lucchese associate Joseph Joey Blue Eyes Cosentino. Now, they would work for a rival bookmaker, and Mazzarella was furious. They were cutting into his action. They were messing with his territory, and Mazzarella made a beef over it. Eventually, though, they decide to have a sit down over it. Let's not have a beef here. The thing was, Darren Mazzarella had other ideas. He would stalk them and essentially lure them to a bar in Pelham Parkway in the Bronx. They would sit down with the brothers Constantino. However, as I said, Mazzarella had other ideas. As they got up, Mazzarella and Freddie Boy Santarelli would assault and ultimately shoot at the Costantino brothers as they left the bar. So they essentially jumped them and tried to kill them. They wanted to send a message. You're not going to screw with us. You're not going to mess with our bookmaking operation. And keep in mind, the higher ranking mobsters, as long as the money comes up, they don't care what happens. You shoot each other. As long as you get me our money, we don't care. The life, though, that Mazzarella was living was a wild one, right? All these guys, they were living in just like any other mob farm team. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of violence, a lot of murders. Things were kind of getting out of control for Mazzarella, and it would really get out of control in and around June of 1995. Mazzarella and John Petrocelli were at a park called Loretto Park in and around Morris Park in the Bronx. Now, I want to kind of go over what, according to Mr. Mazzarella, I want to go over kind of what he said happened. He would say that he and Petrocelli were hanging out, to which a person called Gene Gallo walked up. Gene Gallo was, according to Darren, kind of a goofy guy. Mazzarella would say that at one point they were just busting Gallo's balls, to which Petrocelli threw a bottle at him as he walked away. Now, Gallo would return with a Genovese hitman called Michael Hippie Zanfardino. Now, Mazzarella would further state that Gene Gallo was not tough. In fact, he would say, quote, "Gallo was a pussy. One of my guys beat the shit out of him once and got Gallo to say, quote, 'I'm a pussy,' which shows how much of a pussy the guy really was. He was driving a Mercedes convertible and he wanted desperately to be a wise guy. But the Genovese crew just used his money for shylocking. We all hated Gene Gallo. He left and came back with Hippie and Hippie's mother's Jeep. Hippie would then tell Johnny, quote, 'This guy Gene is a friend of mine.' To which Petrocelli would respond, 'You're making him look stupid.' So at that point, I knew they were going to be up to something. He would say that Hippie tried to get Johnny Boy in the street, and to which Johnny said, 'I got to do what I got to do,' in his head. I knew Johnny had a gun in his car, and I went to get it. On the way to the car, I hear something. It's Hippie. He says, 'Hey, how's Freddie Boy doing? Give him my best.' I just turned around and walked away." He would then say that Hippie Zanfardino would open fire on him, but that he didn't know how many bullets he was hit with because there were so many in and out. He would say, "I made it halfway down the street running." Mazzarella would say, "My leg then collapsed because it was shattered by a bullet. They threw me into the car and took me to the hospital." So Mazzarella would be shot multiple times. In fact, it was said Zanfardino would fire up to 14 shots at Darren Mazzarella. Mazzarella would then go to the hospital, to which he would then state that Petrocelli would return back to the park to get his car, which, nothing would happen, whatever. However, at the park, Petrocelli would run into Gene Gallo's cousin, a person called Paul Cicero, to which he would stab to death. He said, "Look, your cousin started all this. I'm going to just handle your cousin." So in cold blood, he just knifes up the kid. Now, this would become a major issue for both the Genovese crime family and the Lucchese crime family, because Hippie Zanfardino had friends in high places. Hippie was in Ralph Coppola's crew in the Genovese crime family, and both of them were very tight with the boss of the family, Barney Bellomo. Now, the day after the shooting, the members of the crew the Tanglewood crew were summoned to a meeting, to which Stephen Crea was allegedly a part of. Now, according to Mr. Mazzarella, he would say that Petrocelli was summoned to a meeting to which Crea explained that the Genovese family had contacted him to prevent the Tanglewood Boys from taking revenge for Zanfardino shooting Mazzarella. Now, Petrocelli would inform Stephen Crea that he had stabbed Cicero in response to Mazzarella's shooting. Petrocelli then fled to Las Vegas, where he stayed for a couple of weeks with his family. Now, several days after that, in late June of 1995, this is where Hippie goes to Barney, and Barney makes a beef with the Lucchese family. According to the federal government, acting boss of the Genovese crime family, Barney Bellomo, would then request a meeting with acting Lucchese boss, Joe DeFetti. Now, Barney Bellomo would say that essentially the circumstances surrounding the shooting needed to be discussed, and that Bellomo wanted to make sure that the Tanglewood Boys were not going to pursue Zanfardino for shooting at Mazzarella, and argued that the Cicero murder constituted sufficient revenge against the Genovese family because they were all associates of the Genovese for Mazzarella's shooting. Now, DeFetti would ultimately grant Barney Bellomo's request. Now, in early 1996, after Mazzarella had recovered from his bullet wounds, he would state to the government that DeFetti discussed his desire to retaliate against Zanfardino, but that DeFetti explained that revenge would be unjustified because of Paul Cicero's murder, and that Mazzarella was instructed not to exact retribution. Several days later, at Joe DeFetti's request, who was the boss, Darren Mazzarella and Zanfardino would meet and call a truce. So Mazzarella and Zanfardino squashed everything, and the person that had to deal with it in the end was Paul Cicero, who was the cousin of this guy, Gene Gallo, who kind of started all this. So it was a big problem, right? Lucchese's had an issue, Barney and the Genovese had an issue, and they would meet and kind of hash all of this out. Though the issue that Mazzarella has is things are out of control at this point. He's being shot. He's having to deal with high-level meetings. Him and Petrocelli were kind of out of control. Now, I want to discuss one other thing that happened with the Tanglewood Boys that was actually one of the more sad events. And Mazzarella would tell the story about the murder of a person called Louis Balancio. Balancio would be whacked in 1994. Now, it must be made clear, Balancio was not in the streets. Okay, he was not a street guy. He was a college student. He was actually the son of a local politician. And in 1994, Balancio is out at a popular bar in Yonkers that everybody went to. And Mazzarella detailed what went on that night. He would say that at one point, Louis Balancio, the innocent guy, and his friends were trying to get in the bar. Mazzarella would say that there was also an Albanian crew trying to get in as well, but that we would have a fight with them outside the place. And one of the members of the Tanglewood crew, Anthony DeSimone, didn't want to let them in. He would then say that subsequently Irish gangsters and the Albanian guys started to fight outside at the top of the steps. And Mazzarella said there was something, essentially a rumble went on. He would say, I got out. Now, we were 100% on the Irish guys' sides. However, me and DeSimone came out to help them and kind of got into it with the Albanians. Mazzarella would say that he was fighting an Albanian kid near the underpass that said he knew his brother. I ran back past the bar and I saw a kid who I believed to be Louis Balancio bleeding on the ground and that he thought he was going to die. Now, Mazzarella would then say he got into Anthony DeSimone's car. He would say that we were ready to pull out of the parking lot. Anthony pulled out a pistol to shoot people running. Now, the kid was in a rage, I guess you could say. On the way to my house, DeSimone was driving. We threw the knife out the window while Anthony was, furious. He had blood all over his clothes and hands. I took him to my house to bandage his hands in my bathroom. He would say, quote, I think I killed an Albanian kid. I would respond, that kid you killed, I don't think he was Albanian. I think it's a friend of one of the younger kids. He was thinking it was an Albanian he grabbed because he never saw Balancio before. He just stabbed him up. Now, Mazzarella would then say that he would call the bar from his house and speak to one of the owners. The owner would say, quote, tell Anthony to get out of here. That kid's dead. Now, Mazzarella would say that his roommate, Freddie Boy Santarella, would walk in saying, quote, we're going to help each other any way we can. Then they would take all the bloody clothes belonging to Anthony DeSimone and put all of them in a bag. Freddie Boy Santarella would then leave with the clothes, and he then would also leave with Anthony DeSimone's gun. He would also leave money that we had in the house in case the cops got a warrant and found it, which was about $100,000. Now, Freddie Boy Santarella would leave with the garbage bags. Now, about 12 hours after the Balancio murder, now remember, Balancio is an innocent kid. An FBI agent was kind of rooting around. The FBI agent was called FBI agent Kalor. Now, Kalor was actually attempting to kind of sit on Anthony Santarelli, who they were investigating. He was, again, the quasi-captain to the Tanglewood Boys. Now, Kalor eventually would stalk Santarelli to a White Castle restaurant on Bruckner Boulevard. He would watch as a white Mercedes pulled into the lot and a man got out, looked around nervously, and dropped a paper bag in a dumpster. At the time, Kalor was working on an old murder, investigating another mobster, and he curiously saw Blue Eyes Santarelli throwing out this bag. Now, Cantor initially thought that it was probably gambling receipts or something. Instead, though, he would find the bloody clothes. So Freddie Boy Santarelli took all the stuff involved in this murder, the blood, the gun, gave it to his father, and his father probably said, I got you. I'll get rid of it. And this is pretty funny. Mazzarella would then state, this part is amazing. Mazzarella would say that Freddie basically gave all this stuff to the father. Mazzarella would say, quote, the father has to be the dumbest fucking wise guy of all time. Now, keep in mind, he has 2 fireplaces in his house. However, he drives to the Bronx and doesn't see the only other white guy in the neighborhood sitting in the parking lot in an FBI car. I'm working with fucking morons here. So essentially what Mazzarella is stating is that Santarelli was incredibly lax in realizing that he was being followed by the FBI and just threw the bloody clothes into a garbage can when he could have just burned them in his home in a fireplace. Pretty stupid, right? Again, no one says that some of these mobsters are the smartest people out there. Mazzarella would then act and say that they would take Anthony DeSimone to a place called, to a friend's home called Vinnie Russo, who later got arrested. We waited until DeSimone's father, Sally Bo DeSimone, showed up and decided what to do. Now, at the time, Sally Bo was a Lucchese captain. He would send another person who was a made guy to get Anthony. Mazzarella would say, that was the last I ever saw of Anthony DeSimone. He borrowed my Raiders jacket and said, quote, see you guys in about 10 years. He would then again add that he had never seen Anthony DeSimone again. So DeSimone went on the run. And all of this would all catch up to all these guys because in and around 1996, Darren Mazzarella, as well as Alfred Santarelli, Anthony Santarelli, and other members of the Tanglewood Boys were all arrested in December of 1996. And by this point, Darren Mazzarella would claim that he was completely done with this life. He was tired of it. Things have gotten to him, according to him, out of control. People were dying. They were killing people. Everything was just a complete mess. And look, the feds were zeroing in on him. What I want to do now is kind of discuss what happened to all these guys, because outside of one of them, they're all still involved in this life. In August of 1997, after pressure from his girlfriend, Mazzarella, alongside his brother Nick, would both decide to become informants and flip against members of the Tanglewood crew. In 1999, Anthony DeSimone, who killed an innocent person called Louis Balancio, would turn himself in for the Balancio stabbing. Now, Busby made clear that in 2000, DeSimone would be sentenced to 25 years to life in the murder of Louis Balancio. Now, down the road, DeSimone would serve 7 years in prison. However, his conviction would be overturned after the defense never reviewed certain evidence. He would, down the road in 2010, plead guilty to manslaughter and be sentenced to time served. Anthony DeSimone is said to be on the street. It's unclear what he does today. Anthony Santarelli would ultimately be sentenced to 4 years for covering up the murder and getting rid of evidence in the case. He and his son, Alfred Santarelli, would both see prison time for these little stunts involved in the Balancio murder. Joseph Lubrano would move on in his life in the mob and become a made member. He is currently allegedly a capo in the family. What's interesting is over the last week or so, his daughter was sentenced to prison for drug trafficking, which I'm sure I'll do a story on at some point. John Petrocelli would also, like his brother, be given a life sentence for murder, and he would largely be convicted due to the testimony of his former dear friend, Darren Mazzarella. Stephen Crea is currently serving 13 years in federal prison for his part, allegedly, in the murder of Michael Meldish. He will be released in 2028. Now, one interesting caveat to all this, Anthony DeSimone's brother, Andrew DeSimone, seen on the far left in the gray sweatshirt, is said to be a high-ranking member in the Lucchese crime family. At one point, he was allegedly the consigliere of the family. So both DeSimone brothers, who are the sons of longtime capo Sally Bo DeSimone, both are involved in some way in the mob. Andrew DeSimone, though, has had a far more enriching life, at least in the mafia. Darren Mazzarella, as I said, is the only person to flip out of the crew. He currently lives in the New York area and is 53 years old. As I say to all of these people, if Darren Mazzarella watches this video and would like to contact me, please reach out. I'm definitely willing to tell your story if you'd like to speak to me. I'll leave my email in the video comments. So there you have it. This was kind of the end for the Tanglewood Boys. Once in the mid to late 90s, they all get pinched. They all kind of either went to prison or kind of moved on in different ways in their life. Though the thing I find interesting about a lot of these guys is all of them really didn't get much in the way of prison time outside of John Petrocelli. Petrocelli got life. He and his brother got life, but those were the two killers. I want to also mention that the Santarellis are both around as well. Anthony Santarelli is 78 years old and is, from what I understand, a retired member of the Lucchese family. But his son, Alfred Freddie Boy Santarelli, would actually become a made member in the late 90s in the mafia, and at one point was an acting capo in the Lucchese family. So all of the people we have discussed are either currently in prison or on the street, other than Darren Mazzarella, who many years later is just living a regular life now. I know where Mazzarella is, and I'll tell you right now, he ain't very far away. Put it that way. He's pretty easy to find if you look into it. But I would think at this point, Mazzarella just believes, like most of us know, that the mafia is not going to do anything to him. They're not going to come after him. They're not going to hurt him. Those days are over. I'm very interested in the Tanglewood Boys, as I am in all of these farm teams. I find them really interesting because, they all have kind of a Shakespearean way to them, right? You look at a group like the Giannini crew, or the Bay Parkway Boys, or the Bath Avenue crew, or the Tanglewood Boys. They all have similar endings, right? A lot of them go to jail. They either get out and become mobsters, or they become informants. You look at the Jimmy Calandras, the Frank Fiordalinos, the, Dino Calabras. All of those guys were part of mob farm teams, and they all became informants. However, there are many guys like, Joey Lubrano, or Alfred Santarelli, or Paul Ragusa, or Ace Aiello, or, Fabrizio Di Franzisi. They're all members of the mafia currently. It's interesting how all these guys go. I think they're one of the more fascinating parts of the mob life. I've always been more interested in 90 until today. And I would say this: I think a documentary on all these different crews would be great. Maybe someday I'll put one together, but I do my best in trying to piece them all together in one episode or multiple episodes. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Um, a fate that I think we will all figure out happened. All these guys had their lives decided for them, and some went one way and one or two went another. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed the show this week. As always, make sure you show us some love, support the channel, tell somebody that you might like, that might like the show, tell them about it, and continue to share and support us each week. We're coming up on 3 years of doing this show. Very exciting time. So I won't talk much more. As always, thank you for listening. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.